Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Part 7, The Terminal, Chapter 47. Clark is 70 in year 19. He was more tired than he had been, and he moved slowly. His joints and hands ached, especially in cold weather. He shaved his entire head now, not just the left side, and wore 4 rings through his left ear. His dear friend Annette had died of an unknown illness in year 17, and he wore her Lufthansa neck scarf in memory. He wasn't specifically sad anymore, but he was aware of death at all times. There was an armchair in the museum from which he could see almost the entire tarmac, the preparation area where the hunters hung their deer and boar and rabbits from a rack improvised on the underside of the wing of a 737, carving meat for the people and feeding innards to the dogs. The graveyard between the runways 6 and 7, each grave marked by an airplane tray table driven into the ground, details of the deceased carved into the tray's hard plastic. He left some wildflowers on Annette's grave that morning, and he could see them from here, a splash of blue and purple. The line of jets parked end to end on the periphery, streaked now with rust. The gardens, half hidden from view by the airplanes parked at gates. The cornfield, Air Gradia 452 alone in the distance. The chain-link perimeter fence with its coils of concertina wire, and beyond that, the forest. The same trees he'd been staring at for 2 decades. He'd recently made all of the Water Incorporated 360-degree reports available for public viewing on the theory that everyone involved was almost certainly dead. The former executives in the airport read these with great interest. There were 3 reports altogether, one each for the subordinates, peers, and superiors of a probably long-deceased Water Incorporated executive named Dan. Okay, take this for example, Garrett said on one of their afternoons in the airport late July. They'd become close friends over the years. Garrett found the reports particularly fascinating. You have the heading here, Communication, and then, which report are you looking at? Clark was sunk deep into his favorite armchair, eyes closed. Subordinates, Garrett said. Okay, so under Communication, here's the first comment. He's not good at cascading information down to staff. Was he a whitewater rafter, Clark? I'm just curious. Yes, Clark said. I'm certain that's what the interviewee was talking about. Actual, literal cascades. That's one of my other favorite. He's successful in interfacing with clients we already have, but as for new clients, it's low-hanging fruit. He takes a high-altitude view, but he doesn't drill down to the level of granularity where we might actionize new opportunities. Clark winced. I remember that one. I think I may have had a minor stroke in the office when he said that. It raises questions, Garrett said. It certainly does. There are high altitudes, apparently, also low-hanging fruit, also grains of something, also drilling. Presumably, he was a miner who climbed mountains and actionized an orchard in his off hours, I am proud to say, Clark said. That I never talk like that. Did you ever use the phrase, in the mix? I don't think so. No, I wouldn't have. I hated that one especially. Garrett was studying the report. Oh, I didn't mind it so much. It made me think of baking. My mother would buy these cookie mixes sometimes when I was a kid. Do you remember chocolate chip cookies? I dream of chocolate chip cookies. Don't torture me. Garrett was quiet for so long that Clark opened his eyes to make sure he was still breathing. Garrett was absorbed in watching 2 children playing on the tarmac, hiding behind the wheels of the Air Canada jet and chasing one another. He'd become calmer over the years, but remained prone to episodes of unfocused staring, and Clark knew by now what his next question would be. Did I ever tell you about my last phone call? Garrett asked. Yes, Clark said gently, I believe you did. Garrett had had a wife and 4-year-old twins in Halifax, but the last call he'd ever made was to his boss. The last words he'd spoken into a telephone were a bouquet of corporate cliches, seared horribly into memory. Let's touch base with Nancy, he remembered saying, And then we should reach out to Bob and circle back next week. I'll shoot Larry an email. Now he said the words, circle back next week, under his breath, perhaps not consciously. He cleared his throat. Why do we always say that we were going to shoot emails? I don't know. I've wondered that too. Why couldn't we just say we were going to send them? We were just pressing a button, were we not? Not even a real button, a picture of a button on a screen. Yes, Garrett said, that's exactly what I'm talking about. There was not, in fact, an email gun, although that would have been nice. I would have preferred that. Garrett made his fingers into a gun and aimed it at the tree line. Kapow, he whispered, and then louder. I used to write THX when I wanted to say thank you. I did that too, because, what, it would have taken too much time and effort to punch in an extra 3 letters and just say thanks? I can't fathom it. The phrase circle back always secretly made me think of boats. You leave someone on shore, and then you circle back later to get them. Garrett was quiet for a moment. I like this one, he said. He's a high-functioning sleepwalker, essentially. I remember the woman who said that. Clark wondered what had happened to her. He'd been spending more time in the past lately. He liked to close his eyes and let his memories overtake him. A life remembered is a series of photographs and disconnected short films. The school play when he was 9, his father beaming in the front row, clubbing with Arthur in Toronto under whirling lights. A lecture hall at NYU, an executive, a client, running his hands through his hair as he talked about his terrible boss. A procession of lovers, remembered in details. A set of dark blue sheets, a perfect cup of tea, a pair of sunglasses, a smile. The Brazilian pepper tree in a friend's backyard in Silver Lake. A bouquet of tiger lilies on a desk. Robert's smile, his mother's hands knitting while she listened to the BBC. He woke to quiet voices. This had been happening more and more lately, this nodding off unexpectedly, and it left him with an unsettled intimation of rehearsal. You fall asleep for short periods, and then for longer periods, and then forever. He straightened in the armchair, blinking. Garrett was gone. The last light of day angled in through the glass and caught the chrome perfection of the motorcycle. "Did I wake you?" Sullivan asked. He was the head of security, a man of 50 who'd walked in a decade earlier with his daughter. "I'd like to introduce you to our newest arrivals." "How do you do?" Clark said. The arrivals were a man and a woman, perhaps in their early 30s, the woman carrying a baby in a sling. "I'm Charlie," the woman said. "This is Jeremy, my husband, and little Annabelle." Tattoos covered almost every inch of her bare arms. He saw flowers, musical notes, names, and an elaborate scroll, a rabbit. 4 knives tattooed in a row on her right forearm. He knew what this tattoo meant, and when he looked up he saw a counterpart on her husband's skin. 2 small dark arrows on the back of his left wrist. She'd killed 4 people then, and he'd killed 2, and now they just dropped in with their baby, and by the absurd standards of the new world, there was a part of him that never stopped exclaiming at the absurd standards of the new world. This was all perfectly normal. The baby smiled at Clark. Clark smiled back. "Will you be staying here a while?" Clark asked. "If you'll have us," Jeremy said. "We've been separated from our people." Wait till you hear who their people are," Sullivan said. "You remember those newspapers out of New Petoskey?" "The Traveling Symphony," Charlie said. "These people of yours," Sullivan was wiggling his fingers at the baby Annabelle, who stared past his fingers at his face. "You didn't tell me how you lost them." "It's a complicated story," Charlie said. "There was a prophet. He said he was from here." "From here?" Had the airport ever had a prophet? Clark felt certain he'd remember a prophet. "What was his name?" "I'm not sure anyone knows," Jeremy said. He began describing the blond-haired man who had held sway over the town of St. Deborah by the Water, ruling with a combination of charisma, violence, and cherry-picked verses from the Book of Revelation. He stopped when he saw the look on Clark's face. "Is something wrong?" Clark rose unsteadily from the armchair. They stared at him as he made his way to the museum's first display case. Is his mother still alive? Clark was looking at Elizabeth's passport, at its photograph from the inconceivable past. Whose mother? The prophet's? Yes. I don't think so, Charlie said. I never heard anything about her. There's no old woman there with him? No. What became of you, Elizabeth, out there on the road with your son? But what, after all, had become of anyone? His parents, his colleagues, all his friends from his life before the airport. Robert. If all of them had vanished, unaccounted, unmarked, why not Elizabeth, too? He closed his eyes, thinking of a boy standing on the tarmac by the ghost plane, Air Gradia Flight 452, Arthur Leander's beloved only son, reading verses about plagues aloud to the dead.